Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport, and this is more members only content just for those special Fromies who go that extra mile for the channel. A massive thank you to you. As the World Endurance Championship is getting underway for 2025, I thought we'd celebrate by going back 35 years and looking at the cars of the 1990 World Sportscar Championship. Admittedly, most of this field is made up of Porsche 962s, but there are still some tremendous liveries on this grid. As with all the previous livery reviews, we will look at every livery from the 1990 sports car grid and give it a rating, with S being the best and F being the worst. We look at things such as colour choice, sponsor logos, said logos placement, patterns, and if the livery is fun or maybe a bit boring. So tell everyone your opinions in the comments below, and let's jump into this look at the World Sports Car liveries from 1990. Jost Racing Porsche 962C. So most of the field were in Porsche 962Cs. The customer Porsche was entered by no less than 10 different teams in 1990, even without a works entry. But it was still the most popular car on the grid. The 962 was pretty elderly by this point, having first been entered in 1984, but in some form or another it was kept successful until 1994. 1990 was not its best year, however, and despite 9 of them in the field, none of them came close to winning a race. Jost are one of the best known Porsche customer teams, first appearing in 1975, and they even worked with Glickenhaus a couple of years ago. Their liveries were a plain white with Blaupunkt style blue dot, tedious livery, barely a livery at all, so we start with an E. Kramer Racing Porsche 962C. On to our second Porsche team, Kramer Racing. They had this really interesting art livery for the 24 Hours of Le Mans, designed by German artist Peter Classen. It's a mix of colours with red arrows. I'm not really sure what it means, but it looks cool. Sadly, Le Mans was not part of the World Sportscar Championship, and so we are judging the black and red Kenwood-sponsored Kramer Porsche. I really like it. The black forms a sort of V-neck at the front of the car. It's very neatly put together, and even though there are a lot of sponsor logos on the car, it's all very well done. It's not the best livery ever, but the pattern is quite striking, so I'm giving this one a B. Richard Lloyd Racing Porsche 962C. This was to be the final season for Richard Lloyd Racing, running a single entry in the World Sportscar Championship, as well as Pink Floyd's drummer Nick Mason in his 1990 Le Mans entry. They partnered with Japanese clothes company Italia, and that meant a pink car with Japanese characters, and from the side, it looks kind of cool. From the front, it looks like someone's nailed the front bumper on and forgot to paint the damn thing. It looks like the car has driven through a dishwasher and still has most of it attached to the car. Still, it's not often you see a pink car, so I'll give it a C. Brunn Motorsport Porsche 962C. Outside of their awful efforts in Formula 1, Brunn were a successful sports car team, and they had 3 of the best looking cars with 3 different liveries. The number 15 was a bright and cheerful blue and yellow car with hydro aluminium sponsors, and it's probably the funkiest of the 3, well worthy of a B. The 16 was the Repsol sponsored car, a livery I would almost call iconic. I don't think this is the best iteration of this Repsol livery. It's a bit too busy with too many different patterns and shapes across the length of the car, but it's still decent enough. C. Finally, we have the also iconic Jägermeister livery. The drink may taste like cough medicine, but the livery looks good on the eyes, and it's our first S-grade livery on the list. Sadly, Brunn would fold a couple of years after this, but they did provide some excellent liveries throughout their existence in sports cars. Their Formula 1 cars were absolute trash though. Team Davy Porsche 962C. Onto the much smaller Porsche teams, and whilst Team Davy may sound like it's owned by a plumber from Norwich, it's actually the property of racer Tim Lee Davy, and Team Davy had 2 different liveries on the grid. A team with little funding often relies on many sponsors, and that is true here, but the Rizzler livery is pretty cool looking. I like the shade of violet, and the sponsor logos fit in pretty well, except the black square on the rear ring. A definite C-grade livery. The other is similar but orange instead of purple, and we have more Japanese writing courtesy of sponsors Marukatsu, but also die-cast manufacturer Burago. And I like this one a little better. It's slightly neater and brighter to look at, so this one gets a B. Good effort for the small Team Davy. Obermeyer Racing Porsche 962C. Nothing special, in fact this livery looks like it belongs in the 80s, not 1990. White car with red and blue blocks surrounding the Primagaz sponsor logo, which is in a very large font. Just something unappealing about this car. Can't blame them. The colours are of the sponsor, so it's their fault, but this is still an F. Conrad Motorsport Porsche 962C. Franz Conrad himself raced in the plain white Porsche. So ugly and forgettable it gets an F for being rather offensive to look at. The second Conrad Motorsport Porsche had a Tic Tac livery. Best in the field, obvious S. Actually, to be fair, the 32 Porsche had a blue livery with more sponsors on it later in the year. Nothing that stands out too much, but tidy enough for a D. But it's the Tic Tac Porsche that really steals the show. The colours are perfect, the right dot pattern is both fun to look at and matches the sponsor perfectly. The gold and red don't interfere with the main pattern too much. It's great, really deserving of its S. Equip Almeras Freres Porsche 962C. One car but two different liveries, having a black Alpha Racing livery for round 1 with Tiff Nadell and Derek Bell driving. Looks cool, but I can't find many pictures of it. Kind of looks like an old Shadow Formula 1 car. It's worth a see. And later when the Almeras brothers were racing the car, it had this much cheaper looking white and blue livery. Absolutely nothing stands out about this livery at all, and in fact it looks kind of crappy. Only an E, should have stuck to the black and white livery throughout. Swiss team Salomon Porsche 962C. And onto our final Porsche team, changed ever so slightly throughout the year, but was mostly white with whatever sponsor they had that week slapped on the side. F, put a little effort into it, guys. Team Sauber Mercedes. Any Mercedes racing car usually has a pretty boring livery, but goes like stink and tends to win races. That was the case with their 90s sports cars too. Just silver, very, very shiny silver. It's pretty dull and featureless, but I will say the car itself is very cool looking, kind of like a silver Batmobile. Because of the boring livery, it's an E. If it just had something about it that stood out, it would be much better. Considering it had future legend Michael Schumacher on the books, as well as sports car legends Mara Baldi, Jochen Mass, Jean-Louis Schlezer, and future Formula 1 drivers Heinz-Harald Frentzen and Karl Wendlinger, they deserved an iconic livery to go with the success they would have with the Sauber Mercedes. Silk Cut Jaguar. S-grade, obviously. It's one of the best liveries in the history of anything ever. Silk Cut Jaguar is like the John Player Special Lotus or Gulf Oil 4 GT. Everyone knows it, and everyone knows it looks great. I slightly prefer the earlier version, which had thicker yellow trim, but this is still a legendary S-grade livery that will always be cool. And it makes me a little sad that tobacco companies can't advertise anymore, because they always had the best liveries. S-grade, and by far the best on the grid. One of the best of all time. Spice Engineering. After Porsche, it was Spice that had the most customer teams on the grid. 4 different teams ran Spice SE90Cs. The work Spice Engineering team had 2 themselves. The type of sponsor can affect how cool a livery is. The red, white and yellow Spice looks pretty good. A little old fashioned, but it's still a good looking car. Ruined by the fact it was sponsored by a migraine medication, and the slogan migraine relief along the side makes this somehow kind of lamer. In fact, it looks like the box migraine medicine might come in. It's a C, because it isn't terrible, it's just an unfortunate sponsor choice. When you're a small team like Spice, you can't really turn anyone down. Spice sadly went under a few years later, but they had a lot of success in their brief existence. Chamberlain Engineering. Started the year with a British Barn BB90R, but switched to a Spice after round 1. Unfortunately, it was yet another plain white livery, easily forgotten with an F. GP Motorsport. This was also Chamberlain Engineering in disguise, and a much better looking disguise, I have to say. Started the year all yellow, but switched to yellow and red later in the season. Sponsors nicely fit the scheme. It's weird that you'd go for this for your secondary team, but the team that bears your name, you give a boring white livery. I like this Spice. It's a B. The Berkeley Team London. Another yellow Spice. This one is not as neatly put together, seemingly with a larger number of smaller sponsors. The logos are kind of thrown around everywhere. The blotchy white bits at the front and back don't help things. And of course it's hurt by the fact there is another yellow Spice in the field. This one is a D. Courage Competition Cougar. Courage actually ran a Porsche in one race, and Courage's in the rest of them. The Porsche did have an identical livery to the Courage's. Dark blue with light blue and white trim, very neat with sponsors, and the livery is very 90s. Not the brightest in the field, but there isn't anything I'd point to as wrong. Very middle of the road, so easily a C. Louis Descartes ALD. Automobiles, Louis Descartes. Old Louis was around in sports cars for a very long time. The livery changed every race, or seemingly so. It started off white with red and yellow trim. Then it was white with a block of blue and more sponsor logos. And then red and yellow like the GP Spice. None of the liveries are remotely similar to each other, but I'll give them all a B for variety at least. Toyota Team Toms. In 1989, Tom's Toyota had another iconic sports car livery in the yellow Taka Q colours. I had a die-cast model as a child, and it remains one of my favourites. In 1990, they were red and white and boring. Very businesslike, very sensible, plainer than the blue and white Minolta livery they had at Le Mans in 1990. Why be surrounded in all these great liveries and go with the most boring option? It's a D for the lack of imagination. Nissan Motorsports International. The car that stormed to pole at Le Mans also had a strangely French theme going on with the colours. Maybe a homage to the country that Le Mans resides in, or maybe a coincidence. I like this livery a lot. It's another that I would call iconic, so much so Nissan have done homages to this livery in recent times. I think they nailed the colour scheme perfectly. All of it blends well together, great pattern, and it's a memorable livery if nothing else. Not the greatest, but still a strong A-grade livery. Alba Formula Team. Possibly the most interesting car in the field. Made by former Osella and 40 employee Giorgio Stirano, the Alba ran with either a Subaru or a Buick engine. Somehow it even managed to sneak into 4th place at a couple of races. As interesting as the car is, it did not have an interesting livery. It's white with SDI in blue. So boring. You had a Buick engine, it could have been legendary. It's an F. Peugeot Talbot Sport. Our final team is Peugeot and the first appearance of the 905 in sports car racing. This monster would go on to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans twice, including a famous 1-2-3 finish in 1993, and it won the World Sportscar Championship in 1992. It appeared for the first time at the final 2 races of the year with Formula 1 champion Keke Rosberg and Formula 1 race winner Jean-Pierre Jabouet. It wasn't quite the look it became a year later, but it looks okay, mostly white with a neat 3-line trim, which looks better on a sports car than it did on a touring car. As I said, when they added the fluorescent yellow later, it improved the look considerably. But them turning up for 2 races in 1990 was a test session, so we can consider this a test livery. It's a B, but it later became an S. So they are all the liveries I could find for the 1990 World Sports Car Grid. Surprising how hard some of these cars were to find. Thank you to everyone watching for being a member and supporting the channel. Stay tuned because I'll be back with more members only content every month. And in the meantime, we have the start of Formula 1 and everything else for 2025 soon. Thank you again and have a good one.